Maybe we can start by talking about mustaches and how they uniquely qualify you to do certain jobs.
So when I got this job, my friends in weed science, they told me, well, only the good extension specialists have goatees. And I was like, I can't compete. I mean,
Goatee?
Yeah.
Wow. We're going to get you like one of those fake costume goatees. Well, the mustaches allowed me to become a paramedic and uniquely qualified to work at the Watch a Brick Carnival.
All right. Are we ready?
How do I silence my phone?
It's an iPhone.
Yeah.
On the side, there's like a little button.
Let's go!
Welcome to CabCast, your trusted companion for exploring the cutting edge of agriculture, from the field to the lab and everywhere in between. Brought to you by Virginia Cooperative Extension and the Eastern Shore Agricultural Research and Extension Center, this podcast is rooted in science, innovation, and community. Whether you're a seasoned farmer, an aspiring agriculturalist, or simply curious about the forces shaping our food systems, CabCast is your go-to source for timely insights, expert advice, and practical knowledge, all conveniently delivered on the go. Join us as we dig into the latest trends, groundbreaking research, and real-world applications that are transforming agriculture on the Eastern Shore and beyond.
Well, welcome everybody to this next podcast of CabCast. I'm Mark Ryder, and I'm a Soils and Nutrient Management Extension Specialist with our guest.
I'm Carrie Wortell, the Soybean Extension Agronomist for Virginia Tech. I'm out of the Tidewater AREC visiting the Eastern Shore today.
I'm Kemper Sutton, the Assistant Professor and Extension Specialist of Entomology here at the Eastern Shore Experiment Station.
Yep, I'm Doug Higgins. I'm a plant pathologist, Assistant Professor and Extension Specialist located here at the Painter Research Station.
I'm Vijay Singh, weed scientist here at Eastern Shore AREC.
All right. I thought the first thing we would do today is talk a little bit about some events that we've had and are going to be a part of here in the near future. So yesterday we had a great time hosting 8 people with the Research and Extension Experiential Learning Program with Virginia Tech. And this is a collaboration where we host undergrad students 5 weeks on campus to work in the basic science lab, and then 5 weeks at an agricultural research and extension center so they can see how applied work ties back to basic work, and then really train these new students to better understand that, you know, something that's fundamental science can be easily applicable to the ag industry. So we always had a good time with that, and we showed them around, took them on a trolley ride, and focused on cover crops and some of Kemper's entomology work in potatoes, and Doug showed some of his work, which he'll talk about today on the podcast, and also some uncrewed aerial vehicle flying and drone spraying and herbicide injury symptomology and over in VJ's plots with weed science.
And also chicken salad from the diner.
Oh, yeah. We had chicken salad, yeah. That's probably my favorite
local
food.
favorite, yeah.
So,
We also had a field day.
Tell us about that, VJ.
It was great, and the results were really excellent. And I would even encourage growers who didn't make to a field day, they can visit anytime. They can schedule their visit also. We would take them to the field and would show the results of those product testing trials in corn and soybean and edamame too. Normally what we see, growers, they say weed scientists these days, they just mix several different chemicals together, like tank mixes or kind of a premix also, right? And just to get a good efficacy. But if you see our edamame is not a herbicide resistant or herbicide tolerant crop, right? So we are still using conventional herbicides over there. So we have tested 15, 20 different herbicide combinations, those conventional herbicides and their efficacy compared with normally. And we have actually edamame and soybeans in those plots. So efficacy, they can see not just in edamame, but also can compare with the soybean systems. So those plots are really cool. And we also had studies on cover crops, how we can combine cover crops with the herbicide in the conventional system with the tractor planted cover crops. And along with that, we also showed how effective drones are in planting cover crops. And the biomass which we observed in the field was actually comparable with the tractors. If we have enough moisture and if especially the fields are tilled after harvesting of the crop in the fall, that's really comparable or even better in some scenarios.
Really? That's always the hard part when you fly any kind of cover crop on is getting enough rain to get it to come up. But you did see good results from that. Yeah.
Exactly.
As long as you had rain.
Yeah. And the idea is just to actually plant those cover crops in the standing soybeans or the crop so that we can have a head start for that and have additional time before we harvest the main crop.
So I have a question as the plant pathologist, not as a cover crop seeding expert, but if you broadcast the seed on, like how do you need to incorporate the cover crop into the soil somehow, or do you have to increase your germination rates with a drone applied seeding piece?
That's actually our question. That's what Mark and me are actually trying to evaluate there. But what we have seen that if you have tilled field with the loose soil, you would see a better emergence or germination. So that's yes to your question, what you are saying. But again, another factor is the irrigation or enough soil moisture or not. If the soil is hard, dry, and the seed is just lying over the top of the soil, you spread it with the drone, then it will not work. We have seen like 60-70% reduction in germination in that scenario.
But one of the cool things we're doing, and one thing VJ's really focused on, and we've done some other work, is flying it on early enough where you still qualify for the cost share payments from the Department of Conservation and Recreation through your soil and water conservation districts. But also if you fly it on, a lot of times the soybean leaf drop will fall after and kind of add some, it's not soil coverage, but it does retain some moisture to help that seed germinate and come up.
So why is there a cutoff date? What is that? What's the cutoff? Like what's the reasoning behind it?
It's all about growth. So I know we have some listeners across the bay, across Virginia, so I'm not going to say a date here because it varies depending on where you are in the state. But your goal is early growth because the whole purpose of our cost share program through DCR is to get nutrients out of the soil, such as nitrogen and nitrates, and into that plant so it doesn't wash away in the winter. You want to get it from the soil to the plant, and so the earlier the better. I mean, as the plant grows, it's taking up nitrogen, so you're putting it in that plant in the fall. So when it quits growing in the winter, there's no nitrogen left to wash into the bay or the bay's tributary. So that's the whole goal, is early.
So early enough to have an effect
Absolutely.
to capture some of the nutrients.
Now, this is different than soil health, though. Like NRCS, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, is pushing species mixes and also like legumes because their goal is to get nitrogen in your soil from the air with legumes specifically. And in that case, you let it grow late in the spring. So it really depends on what you're doing, is how you want it planted. I mean, early, late, or let it grow late. What's more important? I mean,
University of Maryland also, I learned that they are trying spring planted cover crop in watermelons with drones. So there are a lot of things going on around this topic, and hopefully we would get more answers in the next 1 or 2 years.
awesome.
Yeah, that's great information. I'm sorry I missed your field day, but I might take you up on that opportunity to go out and check out the plots, and anybody who missed it can do the same.
Private tours with VJ.
Yeah,
Call
go look at some cover crops.
Yeah, we would be happy to give special tours.
Yeah, no,
Just
that.
ask if he provides food or lunch on this tour.
Just make him take you.
We actually provided food and drinks during our field days.
But what if we
don't worry
call?
about it?
Yeah.
So chicken salad's on the menu for any event.
Menu we have not decided, but if there would be a special tours, we would consider.
Come down to the station. VJ will take you around, and then he'll get you some chicken salad.
All right, well, we heard it here. But in case you missed that field day, I wanted to share and invite everyone to an upcoming field day that we're going to have out over at the Tidewater AREC. So this will be on July 23rd. We're going to have a corn and soybean twilight tour. So the tours are going to start at 3, and we're going to have some stops looking at soybean nutrition, plant pathology updates, and entomology updates. We're going to look at herbicide injury across different crops and different herbicides, some corn irrigation, and then we're going to have Q Daddies for dinner. So that is on the menu. So come July 23rd over to the Tidewater AREC in Suffolk and get some barbecue, if nothing else.
I was going to say, back to the food, fried chicken and barbecue.
Yeah, we're getting the good stuff. So Virginia Soybean Association is sponsoring the meal, and they're getting us set up for a good time.
Nice.
I have to say, being from the Midwest and the North, like what I really like being in Virginia is all the food that is at extension events. Like there's always some good food to be had when you're here. Like, I don't know. It just brings people
You don't go home
together,
hungry.
right?
Yeah.
Come eat and talk science. Yeah.
I feel like it's always fried chicken, snap beans, and banana pudding.
Oh, we're definitely going to have banana pudding on the menu. That is, that was on the quote.
Especially if you go to like NC State's meetings, it's always banana pudding. There's nothing else ever.
Really? Yeah. Huh.
Yeah.
You sold me at fried chicken.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite foods. So, but excellent. So, Carrie, at your field day, you mentioned soybean nutrient management, I think. So tell us a little more about what you're doing with that. And I think it's a good time to be sampling, right?
Yeah. So thanks for bringing that up. So as we're kind of entering July, somehow it's creeping up on us. Now, most of the soybeans across the state are starting to flower. And so during these R1, R2 growth stages is the perfect time to start taking your tissue tests if you're worried about a nutrient deficiency. And again, so some of the concern is hidden hunger. So is there something out there that is yield limiting without showing those visual symptoms? If there is, we want to be addressing it now before we really start filling those pods and setting our final yield. But the big thing is, you got to start with a correct tissue test. So we don't want to be applying anything as far as a nutrient if we don't need it. So you want to think of that barrel for the most yield limiting factor. So we want to identify first what that yield limiting factor is, whether that's potassium, whether that's manganese, and basically depending on what that yield limiting factor is, if that's a nutrient, if it's a macronutrient, so then we're needing large amounts, then we're going to want to apply any granular fertilizer source. If it's a micronutrient, then we can get away with those foliar feeds because we only need that small amount. So really first identifying with a tissue test if we do have a nutrient deficiency, and then responding accordingly with that either granular or foliar feed, depending on if it's a macro or a micronutrient. And so to take that tissue test, really what we want to do is go out into the field, identify different management zones, and within each zone, we're going to take at least 18 of the uppermost fully expanded trifoliate leaf. And I'll kind of break that down. So first we want to start at the top of the plant and work our way down, typically 3 nodes from the top. And you're going to find that darker colored leaf. It's going to have a coarser texture. So those newly developing leaves, they're going to have a higher concentration of nutrients because there is less leaf material. So when you find that uppermost fully expanded trifoliate leaf with the darker color, the coarser texture, you're going to take at least 18 of those, put those in a paper bag in 1 composite sample for each management zone, and then send those to the lab for analysis. And then the next step is to make sure that you're interpreting those results carefully. And so whether it's myself, Mark Ryder, there's several people who are there willing to help interpret those results if you've got questions, but really starting with taking that tissue test if you're concerned about anything, and then following up with an in-season application if it's needed. But again, it comes down to that barrel. What's your most yield limiting factor, and addressing that, and that's going to be the most economic way to kind of approach things as we're starting to enter these reproductive flowering stages in our soybean crop.
Excellent, Carrie. And I know you have a Virginia Soybean Board project, I believe, that's funding some of this work, right?
Yes. So thanks for bringing that up. So the Virginia Soybean Board is funding us looking at some of these in-season potassium applications. So the question is, first of all, can we improve our diagnostic abilities with some expanded critical concentration? So that helps us with that interpretation component. So the first step is taking a good sample. The second step is interpreting that sample accordingly. So we're looking at both interpreting that sample, and then when we do find these deficiencies, can we successfully correct that deficiency with a granular, and we're going to include a foliar feed just to get both of those different sources. But really, my background coming from the University of Arkansas, we have a lot of success out in Arkansas with that. But again, that's all irrigated. So that's going to be the component there. So if we do find ourselves with a potassium deficient field and put out a granular source of fertilizer, because again, potassium is a macronutrient, so we need that large quantity, we're going to need that rain to incorporate the potash. Otherwise, it's just going to sit on the soil surface. But the Virginia Soybean Board is funding this project to look at that on a much larger scale. And it's actually a nationwide project. So we're leading it here at Virginia Tech, but we have 16 different states looking at this across the nation to get a large amount of data in a short amount of time to really try and answer that question. So I'm really excited about seeing the results that we collect from this year's research.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's something we really need to focus on as far as nutrients in soybean production systems. And just to remind you all, I know we touched this on this we touched on this a little last week about straw. Pretty much everyone's wrapping up wheat harvest and baling straw, but I have my numbers with me, and just to give you an idea, as it relates back, especially to potassium, for every acre that you have a 2-ton production of straw, so 2 tons of, say, wheat straw per acre, in that straw you're removing about 32 pounds of nitrogen, 5 pounds of phosphorus, about 55 pounds of potassium, and about 2 pounds of sulfur. So just think about that when you're baling straw and hauling it off. Is we got to make sure we get these nutrients out there, and you are taking some of these nutrients away from your double crop soybean. So just keep that in mind, and that value is per ton is about 25 to 30 bucks per ton. So if you have a 2-ton straw, that's 50 to 60 bucks an acre in fertilizer you're removing.
Well, and that's really interesting, 55 pounds of potassium. So if you did find yourself in a potassium deficient situation in season, about 60 pounds of K2O would be the recommendation. So 100 units of potash, 60 pounds of K2O, that's about exactly what you're removing with that ton of straw.
Excellent. I like it when the math works.
We're rounding a little, but it works.
Well, moving on to some other topics, to some non-fertilizer people, I guess. I know Kemper had some updates. He's been out digging potatoes in the 100-degree weather, and I was out there yesterday briefly. But just update us on that, Kemper.
Yeah, it's certainly been hot, but the potatoes were ready to come out of the ground, so we couldn't really help that situation. But we've been steady digging potatoes the past few days, hoping to wrap up this afternoon and get them in the grader shed for the rest couple of days. But it seems like a lot of folks are full swing into harvesting potatoes out here, and in terms of insect pressure, the trials here on the station, we're looking at wireworms and Colorado potato beetles, which I've touched on in some previous podcasts. In terms of post-harvest evaluations, wireworms is really what we've been looking at. They burrow into the tubers. And so we did evaluate one field in Northampton County this past week for overall wireworm injury. And it was only, they ran about 1% to 2% of the tubers we evaluated had some wireworm injury. And they did have a considerable amount of input cost from the insecticide end. So, we're still in the pocket, I think, for managing them. But again, with some of my research efforts is, how can we decrease the amount of input costs and keep it in the pocket of 1% to 2% injury? And so here on the station, we've had phenomenal wireworm pressure this year. I know most folks who are growing potatoes don't want to hear that, but I'm happy to have the bugs in the field. And we've had, up to 30% of some of our untreated plots that had the tubers had wireworm injury. Yeah.
So is 2% a lot? I put it in perspective for me.
It doesn't sound a lot when you say just 2%.
I mean, it's not a lot. I think that's not a lot. I'm not sure what that adds up to in terms of dollar signs, right, at the end of the day, but that's pretty good. When you look at all these different vegetables we work with, if you could always have 2% or less injury, that's pretty good.
Because that's a loss, right? That 2% is just trash.
That's trash.
You can't make a potato chip out of it. You can't sell it at the grocery store.
I guess it depends on who they're working with, but the damage can be sometimes extensive depending on how far they traveled inside. So I think a lot of times our guys are just throwing those out.
Is the damage always visible, like obviously visible, or is it sometimes like you won't notice until you slice the potato open?
Typically, we do have some variability in sizes of wireworms. We have what we call different instars, which is like the different sizes of wireworms as they develop. So like a fifth instar would be, just one step short of turning into that adult click beetle, where a first instar would be just like a tiny little one that's in the early stages of its life. And so depending on that, the diameter of that wireworm does change. So you will see some differences in holes, but usually it is pretty obvious where they've gone in. It literally looks like you took a 22 and just shot a straight hole into the tuber. But if you don't recognize the hole right away, it could slip past, and depending on how much time they've spent in that tuber, or if a secondary pathogen entered into that tuber, then when you cut into the tuber, if you were to try to save them and use them for something else, you might notice some extensive damage on the inside that's not clearly visible from the outside.
Because we had that one sample that Helen brought us this past week, which was a holy tuber, had holes, like cavities in it. And we didn't think that the cavities were, in consulting with you, I recall the cavities weren't insect related. And we ended up finding powdery scab in that area, which is which is a pathogen we don't see around here a lot.
That just sounds bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's one other pest that we see sometimes is the white grub. That's like the Japanese beetle larvae. If you have a garden, you till up your garden or your yard, you're gonna see like the little fat white grubs. They are like voracious feeders. They like don't have a unique type of feeding. It's just ragged edges, a big hole. It's almost like a mouse was chewing on it is what it looks like. And that's what that sample, I think, is. We initially thought maybe some of it was white grub just because of the way the pattern was. But wireworms is a very uniform type of feeding. So, yeah, we're wrapping up potatoes. Things are looking good. Hoping to have those results all analyzed and ready for the ag conference this following year. But I'm hoping to have some conversations with the growers as we wrap up potatoes here to kind of get an overall picture of what the insect pressure looked like this year in terms of their post-harvest stuff.
Did you see any pink rot in your trials?
There was some pink rot, yeah.
Yeah. That's one we talked about briefly last week. Just as a reminder, that control is happening all in the beginning of the cycle. So in furrow and then at dime-sized tuber formation, 2 hits of fungicide of a water mold specific fungicide.
And I didn't put any fungicides on my trial.
So you didn't put any fungicides?
No, we don't want to. It's just purely insecticides, and we still had good yields, but there were some areas of the field I think that. I don't know. I'm not a pathologist. I don't know if the soil moisture and things within the field impacts the prevalence of the rot, but there were certainly areas within the field that had more.
Yeah, I mean that observation is spot on because the pathogen that causes the disease is a water mold, and so just by its name, what it likes to do is it has a specialized spore that swims in water and can infect. So those low-lying. Well, we say low-lying, but when I first got out here, the first field I went to, the grower said, "Oh, I'm noticing this spot in the high areas of in the high peaks of my field." And if here on the Eastern Shore, there are no high peaks of our field. It's flat as can be.
5 feet.
Yes, but yes. So reorienting, but yes, the low areas of a field where water can accumulate.
And I think that's exactly what I saw
hold
in mine.
Moisture. Yeah, exactly.
So it's good. It's nice to finally begin wrapping up the potatoes, and now we're starting to look at some other things as potatoes have been wrapping up. I know that Doug and I have been talking about cucurbits a little bit this week, and some of the insects and diseases that we're either working on or starting to see. And so, I've got a cucumber trial. Doug, I know you have some watermelons and maybe some other cucurbits out there. And so one thing with the cucurbits this week that we've really picked up on is we have a large diversity of insects in those cucurbits. Mainly our cucumber beetles. So we have 2 species that are really impactful here is the spotted cucumber beetle and the striped cucumber beetle. They can cause a lot of defoliation if left uncontrolled in the plots, but they're also notorious for transmitting bacterial wilt, which is kind of like a death kiss for those cucurbit plants. And then in your trial, Doug, I've actually seen some squash bug, which is very similar to like stink bugs. They can feed on the plant, but also they cause a lot of cosmetic issues on the fruit. And then one thing that we also hear a lot from homeowners that we've had some concern with here on the station is squash vine borer. This is a moth that comes in and lays its eggs basically on the stem, and then those larvae will actually hatch and burrow into the stalk of that or stem of that cucurbit plant. And once they're basically inside of that stalk, as long as if you're not using a systemic insecticide, they're basically unkillable by a foliar spray because they're protected. And so if you have watermelons or any cucurbits here, it's going to be pretty important to have a program that's going to incorporate something through the drip as well as a foliar spray program.
I'm definitely one of those homeowners that has that problem.
I really think squash vine borer might be the #1 pest of cucurbits in homeowners' gardens. It's not a huge commercial pest, but it seems like that's like the #1 killer of cucurbits in every.
You used to kill it every year.
My watermelons are gone, so I just planted some pumpkins.
The interesting thing about them is they do have preferences in the types of cucurbits. I don't know off the top of my head which ones is which, but there are some types of cucurbits you can grow that they'll, like for example, if you grow cantaloupes next to maybe the yellow squash, they'll hit the yellow squash first every time.
Yeah, so we definitely saw that in my garden, and that definitely clarified that we made some mistakes in our classifications as we first planted it. And so we had some oopsies cucumbers. They did not get those, but they got the watermelons and they got the honeydews. So Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, with your cucumbers, I'd be watching right around the 4th of July. We start to think about cucurbit downy mildew, and homeowners, unprotected sites are good first reporting sites because the pathogen will float in. It kind of migrates up from Florida every
Yeah.
year.
Even though it's hot?
Yeah, even though it's hot, we just need some wetness. Like, yep, it'll still go. Yep.
And you're looking at some of this, right, Doug, in one of your trials?
We're looking at a different water mold called Phytophthora capsicii, which is Phytophthora translates like to plant destroyer. And I think if you came out to look at our plots, it has destroyed plants very quickly. So it's a really tough soil-borne disease. Not all cucurbits are created equal. So then when we talk about grouping cucurbits in this case, we think about groups of cucurbits that are susceptible to the crown rot phase of the disease. So that would be your squashes, your zucchini, your winter squash, your pumpkins. And then we have a set of cucurbits that's resistant to the crown rot phase, which is your cucumbers and your watermelon. But all cucurbits are susceptible to the fruit rot part. So we've got a couple trials going on to try to get at some of these intricacies. So for those cucurbits that are susceptible to crown rot, we're looking to try to get some additional products labeled for application through the drip line because we're really limited on the tools that we have to build a long rotation. Because you can imagine if you have a plant that's susceptible all the way from the time it's put into the ground until it produces its fruit. And in the case of like pumpkins, that can be a long time, right, to get to produce it, and that takes a long extended spray program. So we need some additional options. So we got that trial going. And then we've got a postdoc here working on a trial with a USDA collaborator out of the vegetable lab in Charleston, where they grafted some plants with resistant rootstock. And the observation was that some of the resistance actually from the rootstock seems to be making its way into the fruit. And so we're trying to see if we can leverage that with some reduced input fungicide programs and some different types of fungicides that are types of defense inducers to see if we can get a bump in control there. And then, yeah, we got a PhD student's going to come in and look at age-related resistance on the fruit, because the fruit is kind of like the holy grail, like to protect, because you get like when it's sitting on the surface, like trying to get a fungicide or something to the underside of the fruit is like a very difficult thing to do, right? So we're trying to get creative and see if there's different ways we can protect that fruit. But yeah.
That's
the
awesome.
other thing we've seen in cucurbit.
Yeah, that's a great point, Kemper. So thanks for bringing that up. We're definitely starting to scout for insects. And if needed, if we need to, we're also starting to, or we're really trying to get that last herbicide application out if you lost that opportunity. So maybe VJ has some more insight on that. We're a little bit behind because of the rain in Suffolk, and so we're playing catch up with sprays.
Yeah, and I understand I need to touch upon actually cotton too, because this is a time where cotton growers are actually applying pre-emergence, post-emergence herbicides and or planning to do it. Few questions which we normally receive regarding cotton is the grass control or the grass issues, and some of those grasses, like even the perennial grasses along with the annual grasses, like perennial grasses, Bermuda grass or rhizome Johnson grass. So all of these grass problems can be solved if growers can use Select or Select Max herbicide or the Post, especially if you have a problem of a goose grass, then go with the Post herbicide or the Fusilade. So there are several options for doing that. Now when we come to the broadleaf control, over the top application for the cotton, so some of the herbicides are like Invoke or Staple. Now, instead of using these herbicides alone, if growers would combine it together in a tank mix, that would be provide a better control for Jimson weed, Spud Enoda, and also for the common ragweed and common lamb squatters, morning glory, sickle pod. These herbicides, Invoke and Staple, in a tank mixture would work great until and unless grower or the field doesn't have a problem of herbicide resistance to group 2. If there are issues with the like group 2 resistance in that field, then they have to rely on the glyphosate or the Liberty herbicides.
Excellent. Well, I think we're out of time for this week. So thank y'all for listening to CabCast, and hope you enjoyed it, and let us know of any topics you want us to cover or any special guests you want us to invite as well. So you can just email anybody here at the station or give us a call, or I guess we have show notes that we can stick it in now. Comments, yeah.
So right now, Mark is talking to someone who doesn't have a microphone.
Yeah, I should ask
Note
later
for those
questions.
who are listening. Yeah.
Okay, but anyway, just let us know.
Yeah.
Have a good one, y'all.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to CabCast, your front row seat to the future of farming. Brought to you by Virginia Cooperative Extension and the Eastern Shore Agricultural Research and Extension Center. We're here to keep you informed, inspired, and connected to the land and the science that drives it. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and follow us on social media for updates, behind-the-scenes content, and more.